The canyon walls rose like shadows on either side of John as he picked his way through the narrow trail. Jagged rocks jutted from the reddish cliffs, their edges worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. As he walked, the sun beat down mercilessly from above, baking the canyon floor in its glare. John wiped the sweat from his brow and took a long drink from his canteen. The water, warm from hours in the Arizona heat, did little to slake his thirst. Still, he pressed on, driven by a grim determination to reach his destination before nightfall. It had been a year since he last set foot in this place. A year of fitful nights, haunted by the same nightmare, Greg's pale face staring up at him in terror as he lost his footing on the canyon's edge. The echo of his friend's scream as he plunged into the abyss below, forever silenced upon impact with the unforgiving rocks 1,000 feet below. And always, that same mocking laughter that had started it all, ringing in John's ears long after he woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding. It was a sound that would be seared into his memory until his dying day. The nightmare never varied in its details. Each night, John was forced to relive that fateful moment when an ill-advised joke went horribly wrong. A joke that cost his best friend his life and left John riddled with a guilt he knew he could never escape. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, staining the canyon walls shades of orange and red, John quickened his pace. He had to reach the spot before nightfall, had to see if the strange occurrences he'd heard about from the park rangers were real. Deep down, he hoped to find answers, or perhaps even lay his friend's spirit to rest at long last. Anything to silence the mocking laughter that still echoed in the dark corners of his mind. Finally, the trail opened up onto a wide ledge overlooking a sheer drop. John's heart clenched as he recognized the place at once. It was here that it happened. This very spot where he stood a year ago with Greg. He could still picture it as clearly as if it were yesterday. The two friends had spent the day hiking through the canyon, stopping occasionally to take in the breathtaking views. As the sun sank lower, painting the rock faces in vibrant hues, they began making their way back to the trailhead. Tired and dehydrated from the long day, their conversation had taken a silly turn. Greg had said something stupid, and John, always one for dark humor, couldn't resist the urge to tease his friend. "Hey, Greg, watch this," John had called out in a mocking tone. Then, with exaggerated care, he took a step too close to the edge. For a split second, he pretended to lose his balance, windmilling his arms comically as he stumbled backward. The joke was in poor taste, as jokes about falling often are, when standing at the edge of a 1,000-foot drop. But John never expected Greg to actually believe the stunt was real. As John caught himself laughing at the look of panic on his friend's face, Greg let out a strangled cry. In his haste to grab John and pull him to safety, his foot slipped on the loose gravel. For an instant, Greg seemed to hang suspended in midair as he windmilled his arms helplessly. Then, with dreadful slowness, he toppled over the edge and was gone. John would never forget the sound of his friend's scream, fading into nothingness as he plunged into the abyss. Now, as John stood alone on that same ledge beneath the fading light, the memories came flooding back with a visceral intensity that made his knees weak. He sank to the ground, overcome as the echoes of the past few hours replayed in his mind. When he had regained enough composure, John searched the area methodically. At first, he found nothing out of the ordinary, just the same loose gravel and scrub brush as a year ago. Then, in the deepening twilight, He spotted it, barely visible tracks leading away from the edge, as if some invisible entity had walked this way after dusk. John shivered, wondering if at last he would find the answers he sought, or if, in coming here, he had unwittingly invited a darker presence into his life once more. As night fell, enveloping the canyon in inky blackness, John knew he had no choice but to make camp. But sleep, when it finally took him, brought only more nightmares, and once again, he was forced to relive that fateful joke and his friend's final. Terrible moments played out endlessly beneath the mocking laughter that now seemed to echo from the cliffs themselves. John woke with a start, heart pounding. For a moment he lay disoriented, unsure of where he was. Then the memories came flooding back. The long hike to the canyon, the discovery of the strange tracks. He was camped on the ledge, very spot where Greg had fallen. Shaking off the lingering terror of his nightmare, John checked his watch. It was just past midnight. The canyon was wrapped in an inky blackness, the sheer cliffs rising on all sides like the walls of a tomb. Not a sound disturbed the stillness, save for the occasional rustle of small animals in the brush. As John's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he became aware of another sound carried faintly on the night air. Laughter, echoing eerily from somewhere in the depths of the canyon. A chill ran down his spine as he recognized the mocking tone. It was the same laughter that had haunted his dreams for a year. "Greg?" John called out hesitantly, his voice cracking. Only silence answered him. He told himself it was just a trick of the wind, or perhaps a coyote in the distance. But the laughter had sounded so close, so human. Refusing to give in to panic, John busied himself with checking his supplies, hoping useless activity would distract him from his fraying nerves. That's when he noticed the tracks again, barely visible in the starlight. They led away from the camp, as if beckoning him to follow. An irrational part of John's mind wondered if Greg's spirit was trying to show him something. Gripped by a strange compulsion, he grabbed his flashlight and set off into the night. John picked his way carefully along the narrow trail, playing the beam of light over rocky ground. The tracks were faint but unmistakable. 2 sets of boot prints, one larger than the other. As he followed their winding path further into the canyon's depths, John began to notice other strange signs. Scrapes and gouges marked the cliff faces, as if something had clawed at the stone. In one spot, entire boulders had been dislodged and lay tumbled in a chaotic pile at the base of the wall. John swept his light over the scene, heart pounding. What could possibly have caused such destruction with no machinery or tools? A noise in the distance made him jump, a low, mournful howl that echoed off the canyon walls before fading away. John told himself it was just a lone coyote or bobcat, but the feral cry had an unnatural edge to it, raising the hairs on his arms. He was deep in the canyon now, with no clear path back to his camp. The flashlight beam seemed paltry against the endless black void that pressed in from all sides. John began to regret his decision to follow the mysterious tracks alone in the dead of night. A glint of white up ahead caught his eye. John aimed the light and froze in horror. Scrabbled into the stone were words carved with desperate haste. "Beware the shadows." As he stared, transfixed by terror, the light flickered and died. John was plunged into an absolute darkness, more profound than any he had known. Panic rose like bile in his throat as he fumbled desperately for the batteries, to no avail. He was trapped, alone and blind, in the bowels of the canyon. And somewhere in the inky black void, He was no longer sure if it was just the wind whistling between the cliffs. Faint, mocking laughter echoed all around him, growing louder with each passing second until it seemed to engulf him completely. The shadows had found their prey, and this time there would be no escape. Time ceased to have meaning for John as he huddled in the darkness, paralyzed by terror. The laughter had faded, but he sensed a malevolent presence all around, circling like a predator that has cornered its quarry. At some point, exhaustion overtook his panic, and John slipped into a fitful doze. He dreamed of Greg, pale and bloated, clawing his way up the sheer canyon walls with broken fingernails. His friend's eyes were black pits, lips peeled back in a rictus grin to reveal jagged teeth. "Why didn't you save me, John?" the apparition rasped. "It's your turn to fall now." John woke with a gasp, heart pounding. He fumbled in his pack by touch alone, desperate for a light. His fingers closed around his lighter, and he flicked it with trembling hands. A tiny flame flickered to life, casting his surroundings in a faint glow. He was alone, or so it seemed, but the sense of being watched had intensified to a nearly unbearable degree. John scrambled to his feet, whirling wildly, searching for any sign of the presence that haunted his waking moments. Nothing but the endless cliffs, stretching away into the void on all sides. He was trapped in a narrow canyon with no way out but the way he came. Panic rose like bile in John's throat as he realized he had no idea which direction led back to the ledge. Forcing himself to calm down, John took stock of his supplies. His water was gone, as was most of his food. Only a few protein bars and some jerky remained. With a sinking heart, he realized he had no way to signal for help. Night was falling once more. As darkness enveloped the canyon, John huddled beside his meager fire, jumping at every small sound. Was that a footstep scraping on stone? Laughter carried on the wind. He tossed and turned, unable to rest with the presence so close. Sometime after midnight, exhaustion overcame his fear, and John slipped into a fitful doze. His dreams were plagued by Greg's rotting corpse, lurching ever closer with outstretched hands. Just as the apparition was about to grab him, John woke with a start. A pale face was peering down at him from above. John screamed, scrambling backward in blind panic. His hand struck something solid, and he lashed out with a fist. Connecting with flesh, there was a grunt of pain, then footsteps retreating into the night. Shaking violently, John relit his lighter with fumbling hands. Nothing but the sheer cliffs greeted his wavering light. Had it been a trick of the mind, some animal drawn to his fire? Doubt gnawed at him as he huddled in his blankets, jumping at every small sound. By morning, John knew he was losing his tenuous grip on sanity in this place. He had to find a way out, or the shadows that stalked him would claim him for their own. The sun rose, bathing the canyon in a pale light that did little to lift John's spirits. His supplies were almost gone as he broke his fast on the last protein bar. Movement in his peripheral vision made him whirl with a gasp. A few yards away, etched deep into the stone, were words carved with what could only be blood. "The joke is on you." John scrambled backward with a strangled cry, colliding with the sheer cliff face. Trapped with no escape, the shadows were closing in for the kill. Unless he found a way out soon. This time the joke would be his last. John knew he was nearing the end as night fell once more. Weak from hunger and lack of water, his mind was slipping into delirium Visions of Greg's corpse haunted his waking moments, lurching ever closer through the gathering darkness. Lurching ever closer through the gathering darkness. As the moon rose, bathing the canyon in an eerie glow, John heard it again, the faint echo of mocking laughter carried on the wind. Only this time, it sounded closer than ever before, as if the entity was toying with him. "Come out and face me, you coward!" John screamed hoarsely into the night, beyond reason, in his desperation. "Fight me like a man, instead of hiding in the shadows." Silence answered him at first. Then, drifting on the air, a single word: "Follow." John hesitated, every instinct screaming it was a trap. But death was closing in, and at least this way he could go down fighting. Gripping a jagged rock in his fist, he staggered to his feet and lurched unsteadily into the darkness. The laughter led him on a winding path deeper into the bowels of the canyon. John's legs trembled with each step, barely able to support his emaciated frame. Around another bend, and a pale figure stood silhouetted against the moonlit cliffs, just beyond the reach of John's fading vision. "Greg," he croaked, straining his eyes. "Is that you, friend?" The entity took a step forward, resolving into a gaunt man with sunken eyes. Not Greg at all, but a stranger, clad in tattered rags. John stumbled backward in confusion and fear. Who are you?" The man smiled, revealing blackened gums. "I'm the one who's been haunting you, John, leading you deeper into my domain." His voice was a dry rasp. "But, Greg, his death. An unfortunate accident, to be sure. But it gave me the perfect bait to lure another lost soul into my realm." The entity's eyes gleamed hungrily in the moonlight. A terrible realization was dawning on John. You didn't. You killed him, didn't you? Pushed him over the edge that day." The stranger threw back his head and laughed, the same mocking tone that had tormented John's dreams. The joke was on poor Greg from the very beginning, and now the joke is on you as well. With a snarl, John launched himself at the entity with the last of his strength. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the jagged rock slipping from his numb fingers. Black spots swam before John's eyes as bony hands closed around his throat. Through the haze, he saw the entity's face up close. Sunken eyes, skin drawn tight over the skull, no longer human. As consciousness faded, John heard one last taunt whispered in his ear. "The shadows claim another soul. Let the laughter never end." John woke with a start to the sound of laughter echoing all around him. Disoriented, he scrambled to his feet, whirling wildly. Had it all been a dream in his delirium? Was the entity still close, preparing to deliver the killing blow? A glint in the moonlight caught his eye. Lying a few feet away was the jagged rock he'd dropped, stained with something dark. John lurched over on unsteady legs and raised it to his eyes, peering closely in the dim light. Blood. Fresh blood, still wet on the stone. A terrible realization was dawning on John as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. With a strangled cry, he lurched unsteadily back the way he'd come, following faint boot prints etched in the dust. Rounding the bend, he froze in horror, the laughter dying on his lips. For there, sprawled at the base of the sheer cliff where he'd first camped, was the ravaged corpse of his friend, Greg. And etched deep into the stone above the mangled body, as if with his own blood, a final message. The joke was always on me. John sank to his knees beside Greg's remains, overcome with a grief more profound than any he had known. All this time, his friend's spirit had been trapped here, tormented by the entity that had murdered him in cold blood 1 year ago. And John, blinded by his own guilt, had unwittingly led the creature straight to another victim, himself. Now, the truth was laid bare before him in all its horrific clarity. The joke had been on Greg from the very beginning, and John had played right into the entity's hands. A sound in the darkness jolted him from his anguished stupor. Laughter, faint but growing louder, as if approaching from the depths of the canyon. John scrambled for the jagged rock with a strangled cry, knowing this would be a fight to the death. He had to lay Greg's spirit to rest and destroy the entity once and for all. The laughter echoed all around now, seeming to come from every direction at once. John whirled wildly, brandishing the makeshift weapon, senses straining against the inky blackness. A scraping sound behind him made him spin with a gasp. 2 glowing orbs peered out at him from the darkness, too low to the ground to be human. A feral snarl split the night as the entity emerged, no longer bothering with its human guise. Skin hung in tattered rags from its emaciated frame, revealing twisted bones and muscles. But its eyes still held an unnatural intelligence and murderous intent. With an inhuman howl, the creature launched itself at John. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the entity's claws raking deep furrows through his flesh. John screamed, lashing out with the rock, feeling it connect with flesh. Hot blood sprayed his face as the entity reared back with an unearthly shriek. Gathering the last of his strength, John rolled to his feet and charged the wounded creature. They collided with bone-crunching force, tumbling over the cliff's edge, locked in a death embrace. For a split second, they seemed to hang, suspended, 2 souls, bound for an afterlife of torment and vengeance. Then, gravity took hold, and they were falling into the endless abyss. The entity's claws scrabbled for purchase on John's flesh, its inhuman wails fading into the night as they plunged into the depths. At the last moment, John saw Greg's pale face peering down at him, lips curved in a small, sad smile. "Thank you, friend. Now you can rest." Darkness took John as his broken body struck the canyon floor far below. For a timeless moment, all was silent. Then, drifting on the wind, the faintest echo of mocking laughter rising up to greet the stars. John woke with a start to the sound of beeping monitors and sterile white walls. Disoriented, he glanced down to find his body intact. Though swathed in bandages, a nurse entered, smiling kindly. "You had us worried for a bit, but it seems you'll pull through. Can you tell us what happened out there?" John frowned, memories filtering through the haze of painkillers. Had it all been a dream? No. The ragged scars crisscrossing his flesh told a different story. "Some things are best left buried," he replied at last. "Just know that my friend can finally rest in peace, and the shadows will haunt me no more." As John drifted back into healing slumber, he fancied he heard faint laughter carried on the breeze. But this time it held no malice or torment, only the bittersweet echoes of friendship that would endure beyond the grave. The joke was over. A new dawn had come. And for the first time in a year, John's sleep was untroubled by nightmares or the ghosts of his past mistakes. Some wounds, it seems, even time cannot heal. But together with courage and sacrifice, we can learn to carry them.